research aspirants. How are you doing? Are you a PhD aspirant? Have you completed your post-graduation and national eligibility test in English language and literature or in cultural studies? In that case, this video is for you. You know that PhD has become a mandatory component in your academic accolades. You have to get your PhD no matter what. What is the first step to get a PhD? Yes, you have to prepare a research proposal. Have you ever been through such a situation when you wanted to make a research proposal but then you didn't know how to do that? I know that feeling. Don't worry, this video will help you through the steps in order to prepare a proper research proposal. The first step you have to take in order to prepare your research proposal is to identify your research area. There are so many topics which are related to English language and literature as well as to cultural studies. You have to identify your research area in order to work on it. Let me give you some examples. In the last decade, a lot of PhD works or research works have happened on the topic trauma studies. These days, this topic of trauma studies is waning. It's no longer in trend. That is just one example. Some areas like disability studies, post-colonial studies and all are exhausted topics. These are topics on which a lot of research have already happened. You may not be able to find a research gap or something new that you want to suggest in this area. That is why you have to read widely and get to know some new areas where there is a scope of fresh studies. Don't worry, I am making another video on potential research areas for you. It will be posted on the channel soon. So let us talk about the next step that you have to take in order to prepare your research proposal. Once you have identified your research area, you are all set to go. Once you find your area of study, you can identify the primary and secondary sources. Obviously, you will choose your study area based on your interest or your ability to work on that topic, isn't it? Now, the first task is to identify your primary text. The primary text can be books such as novels or autobiographies or short story collections or even poetry. The primary sources can also be movies or documentaries or plays. It is up to you to choose whatever category that you prefer. The secondary sources are the research works made by other experts in the same field. Secondary sources are research works made by others based on the theory you have chosen and the primary text that you have taken. You have to make a list of primary sources and then you have to identify a few research articles or books based on the same topic. In a study, we usually try to add something new and original to this field. In order to do that, we have to justify our findings. How do we justify our findings? How do we support our arguments? We do that with the help of secondary sources. We need to support every argument that we make with quotations from other researchers. That is why we have to keep the primary and secondary sources ready before we embark on this journey. Is that clear? Now, let us start writing the research proposal. The first thing you write is your thesis statement. Thesis statement is a brief sentence. This can also be the tentative title of your research work. You can later change it after consulting with your research guide. The thesis statement also appears in the introductory paragraph. It conveys the most central idea of your research work in just one sentence. It offers the summary of your main point. And it has to be, I repeat, brief. It should be completed in just one sentence. It must contain the topic and the central idea of your research work. Yes, you have started writing your research proposal. You have given the thesis statement as the title of your research proposal, and now the subtitle, Introduction. An introduction is also called as the need for study. Why do you make the study? You have to mention in the introduction. You have to mention a brief summary of the whole study in the introduction. It has to be an attractive one. After reading the introduction, one should feel like reading the whole thing, because you can mention why you do the study, what is the need of doing the study, and most importantly, you should also give some context to your study. For example, if you are doing a research work on transgender studies, you have to mention in which community you are making the study. Is it based on the experience of transgenders in Tamil Nadu? Are you studying their experience in this century or in the past one? You have to give the socio-political context in which you are making the study. Clearly, you have to mention the need of the study and also a brief summary of the whole study. What can be expected in the following parts you have to mention in your introduction. Is that clear? You can start your introduction with a quotation related to your topic. You can also use a lot of quotes here and there in order to support your argument. This will help you to prove that what you say is also supported by other researchers in the same field. Now let us see what is the significance of the research. The next subtitle that you have to give in your research proposal is the significance of the research. Here you have to look at the research gap. What do you mean by the research gap? Research gap refers to that small area which you find missing in the study. You have gone through a lot of research works on this topic, but you found that something is missing and you have to talk about that. That is your research gap. You have to consider your research from general and specific angles. How will your study look like in the universal aspect? Or how would it look, specifically to the context of one community that you are analyzing? You can mention all that. You also have to mention what contribution you are making through this study to this field. In other words, you have to say how your study will add more information to the existing body of study on this field. Clearly, you should also mention the social significance of the study. This is what you do in the significance of the research part. You can mention this in a few paragraphs, and remember, use a lot of quotations here and there to support your argument. The next subtitle you have to give is your research problem. Here, you have to refer to the exact context of the topic. You have to mention the socio-political context as well as the primary text that you use. You should mention the exact issue you are going to address in the research. You should also write on the relevance of the topic. Mention the objectives of your research as well. You should precisely write on what you are going to do to reveal more on the topic, because you are problematizing an area to reveal something more on this topic. That you have to mention, and the reader should be able to understand what is your central focus here. The next subtitle you have to give is research objectives. You have to mention the objectives of your research using a sentence like, the research objectives of this study are, and then start the bullet points, to analyze the experience of the transgenders in this particular community, to examine the relationship shared between the transgenders and the others, to assess the role and agency of the transgenders in such a community, to trace the space given to transgenders in this particular society, to study their experience or trauma in connection with their interaction to the others. These are just examples. You have to contextualize your research objectives based on the topic that you have chosen. Is that clear? The next subtitle you have to give is Review of Literature. Have you heard this term before, review of literature? Don't be confused, this has nothing to do with literature. A review of literature is an overview of previously published research works. It is a survey of scholarly works on the topic. You can use Google Scholar, JSTOR, Shodhganga or so many other websites in order to collect secondary sources. You can also use libraries in order to collect materials. So after using all these sources, you can collect your secondary sources and you can give a review of these secondary sources in this part of your research proposal. You can analyze all the secondary sources and give a review of the whole thing here. That will make a good review of literature. Remember, this is a part where you can give a lot of quotations because you are talking about the views and opinions of other researchers in the same field. Here is the next subtitle you have to give. It is Methodology. Here you mention the research methodology you have adopted in order to complete this study. It is all about the methodological approach that you are making. There are generally two types of methodological approach, quantitative and qualitative analysis. Quantitative refers to conducting surveys and collecting data, statistical data on matters. Qualitative analysis is all about using primary and secondary texts to conduct a study. In English language and literature as well as in cultural studies, we use qualitative analysis. So you can mention the data collection method you have adopted. Which all sources you have used to collect your data, you can mention it here. You have to also mention why you have collected these primary and secondary sources. Out of so many other works, why did you choose these works? You can mention. When we do a research work in humanities subjects, we have a moral responsibility to connect the study with the real life scenario. We don't want to remain just inside the books. That is why we can also conduct some interviews with real life persons. For example, you do an interview with a person from the transgender community to reveal more about their real life scenarios. That is why interviews can also be incorporated into your methodology, because you want to connect your textual analysis with the real society. Also in the methodology, you have to give a content analysis. You have to mention, what kind of content that you are using for the study. You can also give a brief thematic analysis and most importantly, the discourse analysis part. In a few paragraphs, you can mention which theory you are using and why are you using this theory and how are you going to prove your point using this theory. That is your research methodology. Is that clear? Here we come to the last aspect of preparing a research proposal. You have to write a select bibliography. Since you have done your UG and PG projects already, you know what a bibliography means. It is the works cited. Since we are working in English language and literature, we have to follow the MLA standards. The Modern Language Association's 9th edition handbook is available. You have to follow the guidelines given there in order to prepare your bibliography. You have to clearly mention the primary and secondary sources you have used, and you should use the alphabetical order of the writers of these works in order to prepare your bibliography. Clearly, you should mention a lot of secondary sources that you have used, and they should be connected to the theory you are using to make this study. Let me add a few more points here. Different universities give different guidelines to prepare research proposal. You have to talk to some research fellows in these universities to know what is expected in the university, or you can go through their website and gather some information regarding the subtitles required inside a research proposal. Also, one more thing, before you send your research proposal to the potential guide, make sure you show it to some peers or some teachers or some other research scholars. Make sure that your research proposal is error-free and you have got all the ideas clear in your proposal. So all the best finding a suitable topic and preparing a good research proposal.